What are some of the most important things we all need to focus on in terms of making someone else feel loved?
Yeah, the big things I would say is you need to try a variety of things because the core understanding is that people more often than not are in an ocean of love, and yet they're dying of thirst because like in the ocean where the water is salty, it's not a form you can use. If the form of love being shown to you or that you're showing to someone else is on a different wavelength from the one that they receive, it's ships passing in the night. They just never experience what you're trying to give them.
Andrew Winkler writes about love. Specifically, building on Chapman's five love languages, Andrew goes deep into the psychology of our personalities and how we give and receive love in our relationships. His interest in the topic came from the loss of a deeply valued relationship. Now he shares some of the lessons that he learned so that we can learn them too. Andrew, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. I was in a relationship that I really valued at the time, and uh, it had been just sort of a fairy tale kind of kind of relationship until it wasn't. And as things started falling apart, I tried to find everything I could learn to figure out how to try to make things better and fix things. And one of the things I came across was you've probably read Chapman's Five Love
Mhm.
Languages. So I read it and I thought, well, this is worth trying. But I wasn't really able to figure out what the love language that would be effective would be. And things were in a sufficiently a turmoil state that I didn't get much cooperation in trying to learn it with her help. And so what I did is I decided that I was going to every day do five things, one from each category, and just see what happens. So I did that. And so after a few days, uh, five things, 13 total, I got curious. So I asked her about her experience. Now, that was a mistake. It was too soon to have had an effect. So she launched into a critique of my feeble efforts. And the interesting thing was, uh, she only criticized three of them because the other 12 she hadn't even noticed. It's as though they hadn't even happened. And so that struck me. Not only were there only three, but they were all of the exact same category, which was kind of confirming the whole idea behind it. But there was one more piece, which is that the particular category was that of acts of service. And I happen to know enough about her personality for that to make a light bulb go off for me. And because uh, her particular personality um, centers around a really well developed ability to place things in sequence, to plan things out and lay them in order. And that dovetails perfectly with the idea of acts of service because when that's your personality, you're always thinking about what needs to be done and when it needs to happen. And when you care about someone, they get folded into those thoughts. And so you're automatically thinking about things that you can do for them or things that they need done for them. And so that got me curious. And so I started talking with friends who also had been exploring these five love languages. And it turned out that time after time after time after time after time after time after time, they it turned out that whatever their love language was dovetailed again with the, how their personality works and which of their they're called
Hmm.
cognitive functions, the ways that we kind of gather information and then make decisions based on that information. Um, it would dovetail perfectly with that. And so what I came to see actually not just five love languages, but in fact eight. kind of different wavelengths that people are on that determine kind of what we'll notice when we're trying to show love, when we're trying to feel loved, when we're trying to not feel unloved.
What are those 8? Do you know off the
So
top of your head?
yeah, so I have to take one step back, which is
Mhm.
there are 8. They're called cognitive functions, and so the first collection um, is the first question we have to ask is it is something real, and we have two ways of answering that, but one of them is just using our senses. And so somebody who's really oriented towards this kind of sensory awareness, that's the kind of person for whom the love language will be touch, physical affection, but also generally sensual um, uh, uh, sharings. So I mean, it beautiful sounds and beautiful sights, things that stimulate the senses. There's also a kind of introverted version of that where you're focused on your senses, but you're actually more aware of your memories of them, um, the current external world. Um, um, that there are some things that are really important to them. Primarily is feeling remembered, because they are exquisitely focused on their memories. When they care about somebody, they're cherishing the memories with them, and so that will be kind of a key way for them to feel loved and appreciated and valued. So then the next question you have, sort of the process of dealing with the world. Once you've answered the is it question, is what is it? Thinking. And again, that takes two forms. In one form, it's the extroverted thinker who is the one that's laying things out in sequence, and placing things in order. And that's the kind that I mentioned at the beginning. And so acts of service is really kind of what appeals to them. But for somebody who's an introverted thinker, that's more internally analyzing things and building models of them and making sense of things.
Now, is
And
that different than your personality being introverted or extroverted?
it's related. The way it
Okay.
works is whichever of these things is your most well developed. If it's one
Mhm.
that's focused on the outer world, that makes you an extrovert. You're very competent in dealing with the outside world, but not so much dealing with your own inner world. On the other hand, if your most developed functions internal, then that tends to make you an introvert because you're always at less than your best when you're dealing with the outside world. Um, and so for at each of these levels of this funnel, as it's referred to, for processing information, um, there's both an inward version and an outer version, and whichever of those is stronger, creates your entire orientation.
And obviously, there are nuances within this, right?
Yeah. So we all have all 8 of these functions,
Mhm.
and we all use them all the time. But we tend to have some that are much more developed than the others.
Mhm.
And because they're more developed, we in turn use them more often, which makes them, it's kind of the rich get richer kind of thing. Because we find them something we can rely on, we over rely on them, in fact. And so they tend to become better and better and better, more finely tuned and honed, while the others lag behind. Over the course of our life, they kind of start to catch up, but we don't live long enough to become really good at more than like half of them.
Hmm.
And so our personality really is made up of a combination of the things that we're really good at and the areas where we have serious blind spots because we just haven't lived long enough to really become mature with all of them.
What are, what were Chapman's original 5 categories?
So the original 5 were uh, words of affirmation and
Mhm.
acts of service, gifts, um, uh, uh,
Physical touch.
physical touch, yeah, and let's see, which one am I overlooking here? Quality time,
That's right.
and some of those map actually very well to personality, as I mentioned, but there are a few more rare personality types that are overlooked. in that way of viewing things. And
So
so,
what
we're-
happened with your girlfriend? I'm curious now.
yeah. So I ended up, for job purposes, having to move away. We were living in San Diego then. I'm in San Francisco now, and in a distance relationship, her focus on personal acts of service, I wasn't able to bridge that gap, and we weren't able to stay together. But it turned out that that saved my life. um, Oddly enough, I uh, uh, not too long after that, I was a while. It was a couple of years, but I was climbing at a climbing gym here in San Francisco, and um, uh, I felt this pain in my back, and I came back down off the wall and decided I was done climbing, but my partner still was wanting to climb, and that was fine. I could still rappel. So I did, and then we went to find another rope. And as we were getting ready, I was also starting to feel pain in my chest. So I started leaning against the wall, and then I just sort of slid down the wall, and then I was just kind of lying on the floor. And as I was lying there on the floor, there were two nurses at the very next rope who were just standing there waiting to climb, who noticed and recognized that I was having a heart attack, and got me an ambulance and got me into a really incredibly great cardio program. They were able to fix it. It was the sort where basically within an hour, either you're fine or you're dead, or severely disabled. And fortunately, they got me there within that window, and I recovered. But it's funny because it was such a random thing that there was the help that I needed right there at that moment. Anything that might have changed in my life up to that moment, I would have been somewhere else, or somehow it's like the butterfly wing thing. It was just so random that it wouldn't have taken anything to completely spoil that.
Going through this, your book is really fascinating. It's partly tutorial in Myers-Briggs and partly tutorial, I think, in terms of how we really use our skills to relate and connect with other people. What did you learn about yourself going through this?
I well, I learned um, about this connection that I'm describing, and how people feel loved. I also learned how people feel unloved, which was kind of a surprise to me. Um, it turns out that not only do we have a way we feel loved, but we also have a part of us that is plays the role of the jester. And what the jester does is looks for what the problem is. What's wrong with this picture? Is this worth doing? Should we be doing something else? And so that's the part of us that is always second guessing our relationship, asking, are we really truly loved here? And so that was actually kind of a big surprise for me. I also learned that you can that it can be things that feel terrible in the moment can actually turn out for the best, and leave you in a better place, and a happier place. Um, and I also learned that just because something doesn't make sense to me, that doesn't mean that I can safely ignore it. There's a there's a story about quantum physics. Oddly enough, the, the when they were first trying to figure it out, back in the 40s and 50s, quantum field theory, they kept coming up with these nonsensical answers of infinity, and since they knew that couldn't be right, they tended to just kind of ignore them and throw them away, and often that surprisingly worked. But then one time they found out that it didn't, and so they developed a slogan that just because it's infinite doesn't mean it's zero. So I guess that came to mind talking about this. There are things that you have to focus on, and take on faith that make sense to someone else, even if they don't make sense to you.
What are some of the most important things we all need to focus on in terms of making someone else feel loved?
Yeah, the big things I would say is you need to try a variety of things because the core understanding is that people more often than not are in an ocean of love, and yet they're dying of thirst because, like in the ocean where the water is salty, it's not a form you can use. If the form of love being shown to you or that you're showing to someone else is on a different wavelength from the one that they receive, it's ships passing in the night. They just never experience what you're trying to give them. And so being aware of that is really the first step, so that you're more attuned to the ways they try to tell you this is how I need to feel loved. And so you're attuned to trying things that are unnatural to you, that don't seem like they should have an effect, but are exactly what somebody else needs.
I think it's an interesting um, reflection also, in that I'm not sure most of us really understand how we want to be loved.
That's probably true. Um, and it turns out to be devilishly difficult for people to figure out their own personalities. So some of the facets of personality are much more obvious to an outside observer than to our own reflection sometimes. And um, one of the ways we can get around that is just with experiments, because while we may not be able, and I mean in general actually people are pretty bad at predicting our own behavior. We just really don't know ourselves that well. But um, we do notice what we are responding to as we respond to it. So by trying a variety of things, like my experience that I described at the first, uh, there was no question what she actually was responding to once I tried things, whereas it was not at all clear to me before I tried them. So that's the things. If you just kind of learn what those 8 frequencies are, and then just try things on an ongoing basis, then you'll start to discover what they're responding to. But as a side effect, you'll actually discover what their personality type is as well, because of the way the two relate.
That's so interesting. Talk a little bit about how personality type does relate to your response to your love type or your preference.
Yeah. So the we all have all 8 of these functions. One of them is strongest for us. Another one is kind of it's called our auxiliary, and basically what it amounts to is we have one way that we gather information, sort of most often, and then we have another way that we then uh, prune those options in order to reach a decision. They're called information functions and decision functions, and we kind of just constantly go back and forth between them, generating options and then pruning them down to make a decision, and on and on and on endlessly. And so those two are kind of the most recognizable facets of personality. But we use all 8, and based on the way we use those two, that governs the way the others get used as well. And one of those is a thing called the gesture, which is in some ways the opposite um, of the function that we use as that auxiliary, as the kind of not as strong but kind of second most important to us. And that opposite thing is the gesture that I was talking about, that determines how we feel loved and unloved. And so by knowing what people are responding to primarily, that's what makes them feel loved. And also what they kind of secondarily respond to as what makes them not feel unloved, then those two determine the entire configuration. And so in particular, tell us what the strongest and the second strongest are. And that you can read off a Myers-Briggs type entirely from that. And you can also read off just by watching people what that configuration is, because it turns out that the way people gesture and the way they walk reveals those qualities.
How they walk, really.
Yeah, there are 4 different kinds of walks,
Uh-huh.
and they correspond to 4 different what are called interaction styles. So one of these is like a charging bull. Picture like the action hero in every action film you've ever seen. They're all, their heads tilted forward. There's an energetic, goal focused walk. They're not really distracted by anything around them. It's almost as though they have horns that they're, charging with. Um, and uh, that's one style. A somewhat related style uh, is in the first season, the first episode of Game of Thrones.
Mhm.
Lady Stark is walking through the castle, and it's like she's on um, I'll call them flatellators, those people mover things at airports.
Mhm.
She's gliding along almost as though, she's being moved rather than actually walking. It's a very uh, energy efficient, very forward focused kind of walk, but it's almost more of a kind of runway walk, of being erect and posture and smooth and fluid. The other two, there's a walk that for this one you can kind of think of Ricky Gervais in The Invention of Lying, if you've seen that, where it's kind of a stroll where you're walking along, but rather than being kind of totally focused on where you're going, you're taking everything in. You're noticing everything around you and just kind of experiencing the world. And then the fourth is think of Tigger. It's kind of a bounce, or think of Birdie, the Dick Van Dyke character in Mary Poppins,
Mhm.
where it's sort of bouncing along, spring in your step, eye contact with everyone, smiling at everyone, trying to engage everyone you encounter. And so each of these four qualities of interacting have multiple ramifications. One is it reflects uh, one difference that people have, which is some people are kind of oriented towards giving orders and taking orders, and they kind of tend to ignore questions, and others tend to focus on answering and asking questions and kind of tend to ignore orders. And so the charging bull and the glide walk are characteristic of that directing style of orientation to orders, whereas the bouncing and strolling style is much more focused on information, asking and answering questions, more friendly, less businesslike, um, uh,
It
tending to
almost seems
ignore
more
orders.
right-brained, if you will.
Yeah, there's probably a connection there, although I haven't really thought that through as carefully.
Yeah, no, because I think of left brain as being more linear, more can do, more or goal oriented, and right brain obviously being a little more not laissez-faire in a
Hmm.
passive way, but in
Yeah,
terms of just taking things in and experiencing things.
yeah. That also, I mean, there are a number of related qualities that all kind of interact here. A lot of times, um, the distinction you're describing is something you'll see between people who are focused more on their senses, um, as opposed to people who are more focused on their intuition, their faculty that makes meaning out of things.
Mhm.
Um, there's also a somewhat of a distinction there between what are called perceivers and judgers, who judgers tend to become anxious when decisions are left unmade. Perceivers tend to become anxious when decisions are rushed. And so that can be reflected there sometimes too. Um, but directory informing is so clear in somebody who says close the window, as opposed to somebody that says it's cold in here, the window's open. um,
That's interesting. So how do you boil this down to help people not only figure out themselves, but also figure out a significant other?
so there are a couple of strategies for going it. The easy uh, the, there are two sorts of laziness, I suppose. One form of laziness is to not really kind of worry a whole lot about how it works and why it works, but to kind of just understand what are the eight frequencies, and what are some things that I can try to do, and then just do them and see what happens. So that's laziness. Another form of I have a lot of background in programming. In the programming world, laziness is considered a virtue. So um, I have to
It
say
sounds
that.
like a big
Uh,
experiment to me, so it sounds like fun.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But the other form of laziness is that you can actually kind of learn how it works and then leverage that uh, to give you sort of a you know a plain road to kind of understanding what a particular person is going to need. The um, and in part it's a matter of your own personality, which of those two approaches will appeal to you most. And in the book I am in the process actually of reworking it from the version you've seen to give more of a, here's how to set up your own experiment and try it and see what happens, to give people kind of a quick way of jumping in, but then also to kind of go on later in the descriptions to give more of what you've read, which is how it all fits together and how to make sense of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how all these different elements come together. And I think it's something we all need to be aware of. How do other people receive our information?
Absolutely, and I mean, there's this issue of type bigotry that I think we should talk about more often than
Mhm,
we do, which is um, I I mentioned earlier that we kind of over rely on these cognitive functions that we are more skilled with,
mhm.
because we've found that they work well for us. But they work well for us because we're more mature with them, not because they're inherently better for all things. And so we tend, so when people say use your head, what they really mean is use your head the way I use mine, which doesn't work because your head isn't mine. And so the faculties that you're good at, might not work well at all for me. But the flip side is that as we go through life, we actually are getting better at all eight of them, and so we tend to underutilize these the these laggards that are actually starting to catch up a little bit, and that's called false ego. And there's actually something called the death of the false ego, which it is kind of as painful as it sounds, where we have experiences that make us suddenly realize, oh wait, we're not as awesome as we thought we were, because the qualities we have well developed are not as all encompassing and all embracing as we thought they were, and we actually are mere children in many ways, that other people are quite mature. um,
No, it's funny. I was commenting on a Substack this morning. We were talking about something along these lines, and it
uh-huh.
came down into dividing people into generations. And the baby boomers were getting a bad rap. I'm a baby boomer. And I think that as we age, my point for bringing this up is as we age, I think you're absolutely right. I think we start to integrate a lot of these lesser skills because
Mhm.
we have been tripped up in our own arrogance sometimes.
Yeah.
We've had more experience in the overall world, and we hopefully become a little more sensitive to these little things that go off in an interaction.
Mhm.
And you may not know just what it is, but you know it's something. It's not zero, as you say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the wonderful thing, of course, is that that gives us the ability to really fully appreciate others, because since none of us can possibly be the whole picture ourselves, it's really important for us to have friends and loved ones that fill all of the blind spots that we don't, that we're not capable of handling ourselves. And the more balanced we can be in terms of those interactions, and the more we can value and appreciate those who bring to the table things that we don't, the better off we all are.
In my mind, it kind of goes back to the Buddhist philosophy of non-judgment. Sit back, enjoy, appreciate,
Uh-huh.
and try not to judge. Hard for us, but try not to judge. Let it roll.
That was one of, speaking of journey, one of the curious experiences I had once is I was sort of being hard on myself, and the thought that struck me, which was it was bizarre. I really didn't have a way of making sense of it at the time, but the thought that kind of struck me was, you don't know yourself well enough to judge yourself.
Wow.
And I thought, well, that's absurd. I mean, who knows me better than me? But as I've since learned, none of us actually know ourselves very well, and so I've come to believe that that really was a true insight at the time. I really don't know myself well enough to judge myself, and I may never know myself well enough to judge myself,
And we can't judge
let alone
ourselves.
anyone else.
Yeah, thank you. That's just what I was about to say. So you've met somebody new. You're going to try out all these different things on them, hopefully in a tactful way, so they don't feel like they're a mouse in an experiment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No.
um,
Motivation is everything.
um, what are some of the key? How do people respond when their love language is expressed properly? What will you look for?
Well, for one thing, they'll notice it, um, which one of the hardest things about personality is really internalizing the fact that other people are genuinely different from us.
Mhm.
And so, in particular, just getting that things completely escape their radar is critical. I told you that seminal experience I had where that became blindingly clear. And so what will happen is you'll find that they won't even be aware of most of the things that you try to do. It will be as though they hadn't happened at all. And so the thing to look for is which ones did they even notice?